What Waits Beneath by Ty Barter. Prologue. 1923, Lepreau River Valley. Professor Jean Guimond knelt at the riverbank, sifting dark sand through his fingers. The late September sun glinted off the water, flickering patterns across his tiny glasses on his clean-shaven face. Behind him, 3 students from the University of New Brunswick Geology Department catalogued samples, their enthusiasm still high after an uneventful week in the field blessed with many bouts of cold and wet days. "Professor," called the youngest, his most promising scholar named Eleanor Cullen, "I've found something unusual in these samples." Professor Guimond approached, adjusting his spectacles. Eleanor held out a glass collection jar containing black sand, distinctly different from the normal riverbed material. Tiny golden flecks sparkled within the dark grains. "Interesting," Guimond murmured, taking the jar. "Where exactly did you collect this?" Eleanor pointed to an eddy near a sharp bend in the river. "Just there, sir. But only from the deeper layer. The surface sediment is completely ordinary." Guimond examined the sample with increasing curiosity. The gold particles were not shaped like typical alluvial deposits. They appeared almost organic, with geometric patterns too regular for natural formation. "We should run some tests," he said, pocketing the jar. "This might be significant." That evening, in the makeshift laboratory they'd established in an abandoned hunting cabin, Guimond studied the sample under a microscope. The longer he observed, the more his scientific certainty faltered. The gold components seemed to be moving, reorganizing themselves within the black substrate, not randomly, but clearly with purpose. "Impossible," he whispered, adjusting the focus. A soft voice startled him. "What have you found, sir?" Eleanor stood in the doorway, her expression curious. Beyond her, through the cabin window, Guimond could see his other 2 students, Robert and James, pitching the tents near the campfire, laughing at some shared joke. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted, gesturing to the microscope. "See for yourself." Eleanor bent to look, her breath catching after a moment. "That's not natural movement. Almost like a colony organism." "My thoughts, exactly." Guimond retrieved his journal, opening to a fresh page. "We may have discovered a new type of microorganism that bonds with metallic elements. Or a new type of metal that behaves like an organism," Eleanor suggested, still watching the sample. Guimond smiled at her insight. "Either would be revolutionary. We'll collect more samples tomorrow, document everything thoroughly." That night, Professor Jean Guimond slept fitfully. Dreams plagued him, visions of vast chambers beneath the river, walls lined with pulsing structures neither mineral or alive. Black veins were creeping across all surfaces. There was something ancient there with intentions beyond human comprehension. He woke before dawn, drenched in sweat despite the autumn chill. Driven by a compulsion he couldn't name, he lit a lantern and returned to the microscope. The sample had changed. The black substrate now formed intricate patterns, the gold components concentrated into structures resembling neural networks. As he watched, the patterns shifted subtly, responding to the light or to his presence. "Conscious metals," he whispered, both fascinated and disturbed. "The alchemists would be delighted, as will those of the zoology studies." A sound drew his attention, footsteps on the cabin porch. Eleanor entered, her face pale in the lantern light. "You feel it too," Guimond said. Not a question. She nodded. "Dreams, something calling from the river, something waiting." We should inform the university, Gimmond decided, reaching for paper. This discovery requires more resources, more experts. No. Eleanor's voice had changed, carrying an undertone that raised the hairs on Guimond's neck. Not yet. He turned, alarm growing as he noticed a darkness spreading beneath her skin, thin black lines tracing her veins. Eleanor, are you unwell? I've never been better, she replied with an uncharacteristic smile. The voice explained everything, Professor. What's beneath the river is not an organism, it's a messenger, a herald for something magnificent. This is an incredible opportunity for humanity, Professor. Gimmond rose slowly, positioning himself between Eleanor and the sample. What voice, precisely? The gold, she giggled. The gold speaks if you listen properly. Eleanor's eyes reflected the lantern light oddly, flecks of gold seeming to swim in her irises. It's been waiting so long, Professor, trapped beneath the river since before humans walked upright. We can help free it. We can change the world, Professor. We need to release it. A knot was forming in Guimond's stomach. Something was terribly wrong with his student. Something connected to the sample they had collected. I think you need rest, Eleanor. We'll discuss this later in the morning. She laughed softly. There's no time for delay. The others arrive tonight. Others, exclaimed Guimond. Instead of answering, Eleanor lunged forward with shocking speed, reaching for the sample jar. Guimond reacted instinctively, knocking the jar from her grasp. It shattered against the floor, black sand scattering across the rough wooden planks. No! Eleanor cried, dropping to her knees, frantically trying to gather the spilled material. Gimmond backed toward the door. Robert! James! He called to his other students. Something's wrong with Eleanor. No answer came from outside. The campfire still burned. They must have been up all night, but the clearing around the cabin was empty. They've gone to prepare, Eleanor said without looking up. The river called them hours ago. Understanding dawned on Jean with terrible clarity. They're collecting more samples. The chamber needs to be opened. Eleanor had gathered most of the black sand into a small pile, the gold components now visibly arranging themselves into an ordered structure. What sleeps must awaken, Eleanor muttered. Jean Guimond reached for his coat, grabbing the small leather case containing his field tools. Among them was a silver flask, not filled with whiskey as his students assumed, but with kerosene for the camp stove. With trembling hands, he unscrewed the cap. Eleanor looked up, sudden comprehension in her increasingly inhuman eyes. You don't understand what you're interfering with, she said, her voice overlapping with something older and colder. This world was never yours. We seeded it before your kind evolved. We're simply reclaiming what belongs to us. Whatever you've become, Guimond said quietly. It isn't Eleanor Cullen anymore. Sweet Jesus, you're possessed. He splashed kerosene across the black sand pile in violent arcs, the liquid splattering over notes and samples scattered across the table. Eleanor's eyes widened in horror, but before she could move, he'd already touched the lantern flame to the accelerant. Fire erupted with a deafening whoosh, a wave of orange and blue flames exploding across the cabin floor. Eleanor's scream, primal and guttural, tore through the air as she hurled herself at him. Guimond pivoted sharply, scrambling for the door, but her fingers latched onto his coat with inhuman strength, yanking him backward. His skull cracked against the table edge as they crashed to the floor, wrestling mere inches from the spreading inferno. The dry wooden planks crackled and blackened, flames climbing hungrily up the walls, consuming everything in their path. Smoke billowed around them as they fought, Eleanor's fingers digging into his throat. "The fire won't stop it," Eleanor hissed, her face contorting as thick black veins erupted across her skin, pulsing beneath the surface like living creatures. "The chamber remains. What sleeps will eventually wake." With his last surge of strength, Guimond pushed her away and stumbled outside. The cabin was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the night sky. There was no sign of his other students, but Guimond could guess where they had gone. To the river, to the thing that waited beneath. He ran, not toward the road and the way out to safety, but toward the river bend where they'd found the sample. He had to see for himself, had to understand what they had discovered before he could warn others. The pre-dawn glow provided just enough light to follow the path. When he reached the riverbank, Guimond stopped short, horror freezing him in place. Robert and James stood knee-deep in the dark water, their skin already showing the same black veining that had afflicted Eleanor. They were systematically breaking through the riverbed with tools from the expedition, digging into the sediment with single-minded purpose. And below them, exposed in their excavation, something glinted that was neither natural stone nor mundane metal, a curved surface with the look of ancient gold, but the texture of living tissue, pulsing subtly as if breathing. "Stop!" Guimond shouted, splashing into the shallows. "You don't know what you're doing." His students turned to the professor. Their eyes reflected gold in the early morning light. "The chamber opens," they said in unison, voices blended with something inhuman. Jean sprinted across the muddy riverbed, boots slipping as he raced toward the excavation team. Too late. Their shovels broke through with a sickening crack, revealing a hollow chamber beneath. Water rushed toward the breach, but instead of filling the void, the current twisted unnaturally, spiraling downward as if devoured by some unseen force below. Robert whirled around, lunging at Guimond with startling speed. His fingers dug into Guimond's forearm like iron hooks, drawing blood through the fabric of his shirt. "Join us, Professor," Robert hissed, his pupils dilating until his eyes were nearly black. "Be part of the awakening." "No, let go of me," Guimond shouted, twisting violently and driving his knee into Robert's side. The blow connected, but Robert barely flinched, his grip tightening until Guimond felt bones grinding together. A terrible smile split Robert's face, teeth gleaming in the dawn light. "Then be thy witness." The ground beneath them trembled, then exploded. A geyser of black sand erupted from the hole with volcanic force, shooting 20 feet skyward. Within the roaring column, golden particles danced and swirled in intricate, impossible patterns that seared themselves into Guimond's vision. The black torrent crashed down, engulfing James completely. His scream cut short as the material slammed into him, coating every inch of his body. He convulsed violently, back arching at an impossible angle as his fingers splayed wide, trembling. When the sand receded seconds later, it slithered away like a living thing back down into the caverns it arose from, revealing James transformed, his skin now a grotesque canvas of pulsing black veins and glowing golden nodes. His eyes blazed with molten light, pupil and iris obliterated by the golden radiance that spilled from his sockets. "The first vessel is prepared," Robert and James intoned in perfect, inhuman synchronization, their voices resonating with a metallic undertone that echoed across the riverbed. "The awakening begins." Guimond finally tore free of Robert's grip and lurched backward, falling into the river. The current caught him, sweeping him downstream away from his transformed students and whatever horror they had uncovered. As the river carried him into darkness, Jean Guimond made a silent vow. If he survived, he would return with people who could contain this threat. He would bury whatever lay beneath the Lepreau River so deeply that it would never see the light of day again. 1956. Lepreau River Valley. The classified government facility was nearly invisible from the river, its concrete brutalism softened by carefully planted native trees. Inside, behind multiple security checkpoints, Dr. Jean Guimond, his hair now white, his face deeply lined, addressed a group of military officers and government scientists. 33 years, he said, tapping a diagram of the riverbed. That's how long we've managed to keep it contained, but the containment is failing. A general frowned. Your report mentioned increased radiation signatures. Is the material weapons grade? You're missing the point, General, Guimond replied sharply. The radiation is a side effect, not the primary concern. What we've contained beneath the river isn't merely radioactive material. It's a biological entity that uses metallic structures for information storage and transmission. A biological computer? Asked a younger scientist. More complex than that. Guimond switched to a microscopic image of black sand, interlaced with golden filaments. Our best theory is that it's an advance agent for something larger. A beacon or terraforming system left here millions of years ago. By whom? The general demanded. Guimond's expression darkened. By something that will return for it, eventually. The entity beneath the river is dormant now, but not dead. It waits. For what? For someone to break the containment we've established, for someone to free it from its geological prison. Guimond sighed heavily. We've tracked 3 major breach attempts since 1923. Each was preceded by unusual gold deposits appearing in the river, as if the entity was luring humans with what they value most. Your recommendation, Doctor? Asked a silver-haired man who had remained silent until now, his government credentials identifying him as far above the others present. Establish a permanent monitoring station, classify the entire river system, create a cover story to keep people away from the containment zone. Guimond's voice lowered. And prepare contingencies for when, not if, containment eventually fails. You believe failure is inevitable? The silver-haired man asked. Guimond nodded grimly. The entity has existed for millions of years. It can afford to be patient. Humans are curious and greedy by nature. Eventually, someone will dig where they shouldn't, seeking wealth or knowledge. Then God help us all, murmured the general. God has nothing to do with what lies beneath that river, Guimond replied softly. Nothing human ever did. Later, alone by the river that had defined his life's work, Guimond watched the water flow past, seemingly ordinary yet concealing extraordinary danger. He thought of Eleanor and his other students, never found after that night in 1923. Their families had been told they died in an accidental fire. Only Guimond knew the truth, or suspected it, at least. Sometimes, on nights when the moon cast the right light on the water, he imagined he saw faces watching him from beneath the surface, faces with black veins and golden eyes, neither fully human nor entirely other, waiting, always waiting. The government would build their monitoring station, they would classify the river and create their cover stories. Perhaps they would maintain containment for another 33 years, or 100, or more. But Guimond knew the truth. What slept beneath the Lepreau River would eventually awaken. The only questions were when, and who would be there to confront it when it did. Chapter 1. October the 2024, Charlotte County, New Brunswick. The first check of the day bounced. Jacob Johnson sat in his truck, staring at the bank's text message as if he could change it through sheer force of will. His calloused thumb swiped away the notification, only to reveal 3 more overdraft alerts beneath it. The dashboard clock read 6:42 a.m. The day was young, but it was already dead on arrival. He closed his eyes briefly, a familiar wave of shame washing over him. His grandfather had built Johnson Construction from nothing, turning a one-man operation into the most trusted builder in the county. Now in Jacob's hands, it was crumbling like old mortar. Every overdraft notice felt like his father's disapproving gaze from whatever afterlife existed. 3 generations of Johnsons had weathered recessions, floods, and personal tragedy without missing payroll. Until him. He leaned his forehead against the steering wheel, the vinyl warm against his skin despite the October chill that had settled over the Lepreau River valley. Through the windshield, the half-finished community center stood like an accusation. Steel beams reached toward the sky, concrete footings poured, but everything else remained incomplete, just like his dwindling hopes of saving Johnson Construction from bankruptcy. A tap on his window made him jolt upright. Jillian Kugel, his project manager, stood outside with 2 coffee cups. Her breath fogged the glass as she raised her eyebrows questioningly. Jacob forced a smile and rolled down the window. "Morning, boss. You look like hell warmed over." She handed him a cup through the opening. Black, 2 sugars. "Thanks." Jacob took a sip, the bitter warmth doing little to dispel the cold knot in his stomach. Cement supplier called. They won't deliver without payment up front. Jillian's expression didn't change, but he caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "How much time do we have?" "None. We pour tomorrow or miss the weather window." "And then Johnson Construction is finished," Jillian finished his thought. "What about the bank?" Jacob laughed, a short, harsh sound. "I've leveraged everything I own 3 times over. My house, my truck, even my dad's old boat. The bank manager doesn't take my calls anymore." Jillian looked toward the river that ran behind the construction site, its waters dark and swift from the recent rains. "We've got options." "Do we?" asked Jacob. "You know, all we need, the proper aggregate. We have the rest of the material and the equipment from Milford to mix our own." She lowered her voice. The Lepreau's running high after the storm brought down all kinds of silt and gravel from hills upstream. Good quality stuff, just sitting in those bends downstream. Jacob stared at her. "That's county property. We'd need permits, environmental surveys, which take 3 months and cost money we don't have." Jillian's face remained impassive. "Or we could take what we need tonight, mix our own concrete, and be pouring by morning." "That's illegal dredging." Jacob's protest sounded weak, even to his own ears. The line between desperation and criminality had seemed so clear once. Back when he'd taken over the company after Dad's stroke, he'd promised himself he'd run things honestly, whatever came. Funny how principles could dissolve like sugar in hot water when 15 families were counting on your next move. The Jacob of 5 years ago wouldn't recognize the man he'd become. The one now seriously considering theft from public land just to survive another week. Since that fucking pandemic, nothing has been quite the same. Was this how it happened? Good people making one bad choice after another until they couldn't remember who they used to be. "It's survival," Jillian shrugged. "Besides, we'd be taking maybe a few truckloads from a river that carries thousands downriver every year. Who would even notice?" as if summoned by those words. A white SUV with the familiar Environment Canada logo on its door pulled into the construction site. Jacob recognized the driver immediately. Dawn Pittman, the new environmental compliance officer who'd been monitoring construction projects along the river with unusual diligence. She stepped out, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses with one hand while clutching a tablet to her chest with the other. Perfect timing, Jacob muttered, taking another swig of coffee. Jillian straightened up. "I'll go stall her. Think about it, Jacob. Tonight, we've got that old dredging equipment from the Milford project in storage." As she walked away to intercept the environmental officer, Jacob watched Dawn approach. She was younger than he'd expected when they'd first met, early 30s perhaps, but carried herself with the competent authority of someone who knew exactly what rules were being broken on her watch. She wasn't a pushover, and everyone who dealt with her knew it. Jacob's phone buzzed with another text, his foreman Ray, letting him know that the crew was waiting for direction. 15 people still showed up every day, despite paychecks that came later and later. People with families, mortgages, lives that depended on his decisions. He set his coffee down, automatically checking the building's truss alignment with a practiced eye. At least his crew's craftsmanship remained impeccable, even as everything else fell apart around them. In another life, he would have taken pride in that precision, in the legacy of quality his family had built. He watched as Jillian engaged Dawn in conversation, pointing toward the temporary silt fences they'd installed along the riverbank. He had, until nightfall, to decide just how desperate he truly was. The answer, he realized as he stepped out of his truck to face the day, wasn't in question anymore. It was just a matter of what he was willing to do about it. Later that night, on a remote bend further downstream on the Lepreau River. "Keep it quiet," Jacob whispered, though the roar of the river nearly drowned his words. "Last thing we need is a noise complaint." The night pressed around them, moonlight glinting off the dark waters of the Lepreau. Jacob, Ray, and 3 of his most trusted workers had brought the small dredge to a bend 2 miles downstream from the construction site, where the river slowed and deposited its load of silt, sand, and gravel. Ray adjusted the dredge's intake pipe, his weathered face ghostly in the beam of their single work light. "Never thought I'd be doing midnight dredging at my age." "Never thought I'd be asking you to," Jacob replied, helping to secure the pipe. "But we pour tomorrow or we lose everything." The machine sputtered to life, its motor muffled by the blankets they'd wrapped around it. The suction pipe disappeared into the dark water, and the first loads of river bottom began flowing onto the screening beds they'd set up on the flatbed truck. Jacob noticed the unusual silence around them. No frogs calling, no rustling in the undergrowth, just the river and their muffled machinery. The eeriness of it all increased his nervousness. For 2 hours they worked in near silence, the rhythmic pulse of the dredge marking time as their illegal harvest continued. Jacob kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting headlights or flashlights announcing discovery. But the riverbank remained dark and silent. The weight of what they were doing pressed on Jacob's chest like a concrete slab. He'd crossed a line tonight, from struggling businessman to common thief. The justifications he'd rehearsed all afternoon rang hollow now. Yes, the community needed their center completed. Yes, his employees needed their jobs. But in the darkness, with river water soaking his boots and guilt soaking his conscience, Jacob wondered if saving Johnson Construction was worth losing himself. His grandfather had started this business during the Depression, with nothing but honest work and a handshake reputation. What would he say if he could see his grandson now? "Hey, boss," called Miguel, the youngest of the crew, his voice tight with excitement. "You need to see this." Jacob moved to the screening bed where Miguel was sorting material. In the beam of their work light, strange black sand glittered among the normal river deposits. Not the usual dark silt, but something finer, almost metallic in appearance. "What is that?" Ray asked, leaning closer. Miguel held up a handful, letting it sift through his fingers. Tiny flecks caught the light, gleaming yellow against the black. Jacob's breath caught. "Is that—" "Gold," Ray whispered, reaching for the sand himself. "There's gold in this shit." Jacob took a pinch of the sand, rubbing it between his fingers. The gold flecks were tiny but unmistakable. His mind raced with possibilities, not just saving the business but finding a way out of the financial hole he'd dug himself into over the past 3 years. None of them seemed to notice that the pile of black sand felt unnaturally warm against the cool night, or how the ambient temperature around them had dropped several degrees. A small fox that had approached the riverbank to drink took one sniff of the air and bolted back into the forest. A dizzying mixture of hope and fear churned in Jacob's stomach. Was this providence or punishment? The universe's strange way of rewarding criminal behavior, or perhaps a test he was already failing? Jacob stared at the gold flecks twinkling in his palm. What had started as a desperate act to save his company suddenly felt like something more significant, a turning point where everything could change. Beneath the excitement, a small voice warned him that windfalls like this never came without cost. But Jacob had stopped listening to cautionary voices months ago, when the first layoff notices had gone out. He was all in now, for better or worse. "Where's it coming from?" he asked, looking toward the river's dark surface. "Must be from upstream somewhere," Ray said, "but getting washed down and collecting in this bend." Miguel pointed to the dredge pipe. "It's coming from deeper than the surface stuff. When we first started, it was just regular sand and gravel. The black sand only showed up when we went deeper." Jacob made a decision. "Let's focus on where this is coming from. Drop the pipe deeper, see if we can find the source." As they redirected their efforts, Jacob felt the weight in his chest ease just a little. Perhaps nothing more than a bit of hope, but that was something Jacob hadn't felt in months. They'd come for concrete materials, but they might have found something far more valuable. The black sand pile on the screening bed shifted slightly when no one was looking, the gold flecks seeming to rearrange themselves in subtle patterns. The pile continued to radiate warmth, evaporating the dew that formed on the metal bed around it. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, they had nearly a ton of the strange sand and gold mixture, and had discovered something unusual on the river bottom. "Feels like we hit rock," Ray called, adjusting the dredge controls. "But it's not like any riverbed I've ever felt. I don't know. It like bottom, but it has some give to it. It's hard, but bends like a shell or crust. Fuck, I don't know, boss." Jacob peered into the dark water. "Can we break through it?" "We can try," Ray said, uncertainty in his voice. "But we should probably stop soon, getting light." "Just a few more minutes," Jacob insisted, the gleam of those gold specks overriding his caution. Whatever's down there might be the answer to all our problems. Logic told him to stop, to take what they had, and leave before daylight exposed them. But logic hadn't paid his bills for months now, Every instinct honed through a lifetime of construction work screamed that disturbing unknown structures underwater without proper equipment was dangerous, possibly fatal. Yet Jacob couldn't turn away, not when salvation glittered so tantalizingly close. He'd dragged everyone, his employees, his family's legacy, his own self-respect, to the precipice of disaster. If this strange discovery offered redemption, he'd pursue it, even as the rational part of his brain catalogued all the ways this obsession might destroy what little he had left. But that gold, was this the famous gold fever many tales have told of? Or something stronger, something deeper inside Jacob? The dredge motor strained harder, its pitch rising as it worked against the mysterious obstruction. The pipe vibrated violently in the water. Then suddenly, with a sound like distant thunder, something gave way beneath the river. The black water seemed to shudder. The dredge pipe went slack, and for just a moment the entire river appeared to go still, as if holding its breath. As the dredge strained against the strange obstruction beneath the Lepreau River, something ancient stirred in response, something that had waited in darkness for longer than humans had walked the earth, patient beyond understanding, hungry beyond measure. And now finally it was being called back to the light. Chapter 2. The dredge motor whined as it labored against the obstruction. Jacob felt sweat trickle down his back, despite the pre-dawn chill. The machine's pitch rose to a squeal that cut through the Lepreau River's constant murmur. "We're going to burn out the motor," Ray warned, reaching for the controls. "Wait." Jacob held up his hand. The resistance against the dredge had suddenly vanished, replaced by a powerful suction that nearly yanked the pipe from their hands. Something gave way. A rush of black sand surged through the pipe, spilling onto the screening bed in quantities that threatened to overwhelm their equipment. Mixed within the dark granules, gold flecks shimmered more abundantly than before. "Holy shit," Miguel whispered, his face illuminated by the work light. "There's more gold than sand now." The pile grew rapidly, and Jacob noticed something odd. Despite the autumn air, steam rose from the freshly dredged material. He reached toward it cautiously. "It's warm," he said, surprised. The sand felt almost body temperature against his palm. A faint, metallic odor rose from it, tinged with something organic he couldn't place. Ray frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Lepreau water's near freezing this time of year." "Well, something's heating it," Jacob replied, grabbing a sample jar from their equipment box. He scooped some of the strange sand into it, capping it tightly. "We'll figure it out later. For now, let's get this loaded and get out of here before anyone comes by." The eastern sky had lightened to a pale gray when they finally shut down the dredge. They'd collected far more than they'd originally planned, 6 large containers of the black sand-gold mixture and enough conventional gravel and sand for their concrete needs. As they secured the last container on the flatbed, Jacob noticed Miguel staring fixedly at his hands. "You okay?" he asked. Miguel didn't look up, just flexed his hands repeatedly. "Yeah, just... my fingers feel weird. Tingling like they've fallen asleep." He rubbed them together, wincing. "Probably just from working the dredge controls." "Get some rest when we get back," Jacob told him. "Everyone takes the morning off. We'll start the pour this afternoon instead." As they pulled away from the riverbank, headlights off until they reached the main road, Jacob couldn't shake a sense of unease. The gold was an unexpected windfall, but something about the black sand felt wrong. That smell, like copper and decay, lingered in his nostrils. The practical part of him calculated how much the gold might be worth. while another voice whispered caution. By the time they reached the construction site, the first true light of dawn revealed dark smudges on their hands that wouldn't wash off, no matter how hard they scrubbed. Later that morning, Jacob sat alone in his office trailer, examining the jar of black sand under a makeshift microscope he'd cobbled together from his daughter's old science kit. The golden particles weren't merely mixed with the sand. They appeared to be growing from it, forming vein-like structures that hadn't been present when he'd collected the sample. He watched, transfixed as the particles shifted with microscopic movements, assembling with apparent purpose. The jar emitted a barely audible hum, like distant machinery. "What the hell is this shit?" Jacob asked himself aloud, drawing back. Rock or sediment with intelligence. A knock at the door startled him out of his trance. "It's open," he called, hastily covering the jar with a blueprint. Jillian stepped inside, looking as immaculate as always, despite having been up since 4 a.m. coordinating the concrete delivery. "How's our special aggregate looking?" Jacob glanced around to ensure they were alone before removing the blueprint. "Not like anything I've ever seen. There's something weird about it, Jillian." She leaned over the jar. "Weird how?" "It's warm to the touch, and the gold content seems to be increasing, not just mixed in." He hesitated, torn between greed and growing apprehension. "I think we need to test it before we use any of this." Jillian's eyes narrowed. "Test it how?" "We can't exactly take it to an assayer in New Brunswick without raising questions." "I know a guy, old friend from college, who works in a private lab. He can be discreet." Jacob replaced the cover over the jar. "But there's something else. Ray just called. Miguel didn't show up for work, and he's not answering his phone. Maybe he's just sleeping in. We were out there all night." "Maybe." Jacob didn't sound convinced. "But he was acting strange when we finished up. Said his hands felt weird." Jillian frowned. "You think it's related to the sand?" Before Jacob could answer, the trailer door banged open. Ray stood in the doorway, his normally ruddy face pale, eyes wide with practical concern. "You need to see this," he said, holding out his phone. "Just got it from Miguel." Jacob took the phone. On the screen was a photo of Miguel's arm, dark veins visible beneath the skin, standing out like black rivers on a map. The accompanying text read only, "Something wrong with me. Black inside. Don't tell anyone." "Jesus," Jacob muttered. "When did he send this?" 20 minutes ago, Ray replied. "I tried calling back, but no answer. Should we go check on him?" Jacob handed the phone back, his mind racing. "Yeah, you and I will go. Jillian, keep things moving here. If anyone from the county shows up—" "I'll handle it," she assured him. As Jacob grabbed his keys, he caught sight of the jar of black sand. On impulse, he tucked it into his jacket pocket. Whatever was happening to Miguel, he suspected the answers lay in the strange material they'd dredged from beneath the Lepreau River. Miguel's apartment was in a run-down complex on the edge of town. His truck was parked haphazardly in the lot, one wheel up on the curb. Jacob knocked on the door, exchanged glances with Ray when there was no answer, then tried the handle. It turned easily. "Miguel?" Jacob called, stepping into the dim apartment. The blinds were drawn, and the air felt unusually warm and damp, with that same copper decay smell from the riverbank, but stronger. "It's Jacob and Ray. You okay, buddy?" A shuffling sound came from the bathroom, followed by a hoarse voice that seemed to contain multiple tones at once. "Don't come in. Not safe." Ray, ever the practical one, moved toward the bathroom door. "Miguel, we're here to help. Let us in." "No!" The shout had an inhuman quality that froze both men in their tracks, a guttural, multi-layered roar that seemed to resonate from the walls themselves. "Something's changing me, from the river, from what was beneath." Jacob approached the door slowly. "Miguel, we need to get you to a doctor." "No doctors." Miguel's voice dropped to a raspy whisper that somehow carried perfectly through the door, like it was being spoken directly into their ears. "They'd take it away. The voice. Beautiful once you understand." Jacob and Ray exchanged alarmed glances. "What voice, Miguel?" Jacob asked carefully. "The one that's been sleeping. We woke it up." A wet, scratching sound came from inside the bathroom, like nails dragging across tile, accompanied by a soft clicking that reminded Jacob of insects. "Waiting so long. Gold is just beginning." Ray mouthed, "What the hell?" to Jacob, who pulled the jar from his pocket. The black sand inside seemed to shift of its own accord, the gold flecks more prominent now, pulsing in sync with the scratching sounds from the bathroom. "Miguel, I'm coming in," Jacob announced, reaching for the bathroom door. "Don't!" The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it from the inside. An oily black substance began seeping under the door. "Not ready yet. Need more time to become..." "Become what?" Jacob pressed his palm against the door, feeling unnatural heat radiating through the wood. The answer came in a voice that sounded less like Miguel with each word, consonants slurring and vowels elongating unnaturally. "Worthy vessel. First of many." Ray grabbed Jacob's arm, pulling him back from the door. "We need to call someone. Police, ambulance, something." Jacob was about to agree when a crash came from inside the bathroom, followed by the sound of breaking glass. They rushed forward, Ray shouldering the door open, revealing an empty bathroom with the window shattered outward. Blood smeared the broken edges, not red, but brackish and streaked with black. More of the strange material they'd dredged from the river was scattered across the floor, pulsing with an internal rhythm like a disembodied heart, emitting faint clicking sounds with each contraction. "Where the hell did he go?" Ray asked, rushing to the window and looking out. "We're 3 stories up." Jacob knelt by the black substance on the floor, careful not to touch it. Up close, he could see it wasn't static like sand anymore. It moved with purpose, tiny particles rearranging themselves into complex patterns that reminded him of circuit boards. "Ray," he said quietly, "I think we made a big mistake last night." "What do you mean?" Jacob stood, the jar of black sand, suddenly feeling hot against his leg. "I think we broke into something that should have stayed buried beneath the Lepreau, and I think it's using Miguel somehow." A scream cut through the air from the parking lot below, high and terrified, filled with both agony and ecstasy, then abruptly silenced. By the time they reached the window, there was nothing to see but Miguel's empty truck, driver's door hanging open, and a trail of black footprints leading toward the woods that backed the apartment complex. Jacob's phone buzzed with a text. It was Jillian, environmental officer back at site, asking questions about riverbank disturbance. What should I tell her? "We need to go," Jacob said, already heading for the door, "and we need to figure out what the hell we've unleashed." As they hurried back to their vehicle, neither man noticed the fine black grit their shoes left with each step, nor how it seemed to crawl upward along the leather, seeking entry through seams and eyelets. Jacob felt an itch along his ankle but dismissed it. Ray rubbed absently at his wrist, where a dark speck had disappeared beneath his skin. Dawn Pittman, the Environment Canada Protection Officer who had visited their site twice before, was examining the Lepreau River bank with a puzzled expression when Jacob's truck pulled into the construction site. She turned at the sound, clipboard in hand, her mannerism professionally neutral despite the suspicion evident in her eyes. "Mr. Johnson," she called as he approached, "I was just noting some unusual erosion patterns along your property boundary. Almost looks like someone's been removing material from the riverbed." Jacob forced a casual tone. "River's been running high since the storm. Probably just natural erosion." Dawn's gaze flicked to his hands, where traces of the black material still clung beneath his fingernails. Natural processes don't typically leave mechanical scoring marks on the bank or tire tracks leading to the river. "We had to move some equipment yesterday," Jacob lied, increasingly aware of Ray shifting nervously beside him. Might have disturbed things a bit. "Equipment like a dredge." Dawn pulled out her phone, showing a satellite image dated that morning. The resolution was good enough to show their trucks at the bend downstream. This was taken at 5:17 a.m. today. Jacob's stomach dropped. "Listen, I can explain." "Save it for your legal counsel," Dawn cut him off. "Illegal dredging is a serious offense, Mr. Johnson." She looked nervously toward the river, then back at Jacob. "But right now, I'm more concerned about what you might have disturbed." "What do you mean?" Ray asked. Dawn slipped her phone back into her pocket, glancing over her shoulder as if concerned about being overheard. "There's a reason that section of the Lepreau is off-limits for material extraction. The geology there is extremely unusual. We've recorded elevated radiation levels and unidentified organic compounds in samples from that area." Jacob felt the jar in his pocket growing hotter. "What kind of organic compounds?" "That's—" Dawn hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "I shouldn't be telling you this at all. But have any of your people reported feeling ill since this operation? Any unusual symptoms?" The image of Miguel's blackened veins flashed through Jacob's mind. "Why do you ask?" "Because whatever you removed from that riverbed needs to be contained immediately." Dawn's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing genuine fear. "Where is it, Mr. Johnson? Where's the material you took?" Before Jacob could respond, a concrete mixer roared to life near the foundation area. Jillian was directing workers as they began preparing for the afternoon pour, using the conventional materials they'd gathered. "Most of it's being mixed into concrete right now," Jacob said, gesturing toward the activity. "Standard river sand and gravel." "And the rest?" Dawn pressed, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The jar felt like pure flame burning against Jacob's leg now. "Stored safely," he lied. "What exactly are we dealing with here, Ms. Pittman?" Dawn glanced around again, then moved closer. "I'm not authorized to tell you everything, but that section of river has been monitored since the 1950s. Something was discovered during uranium prospecting, a geological anomaly containing unknown biological material, estimated to be over 100 million years old." Ray let out a low whistle. "Like dinosaur stuff." "Much older." Dawn's expression was deadly serious, and still active in a sense. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "The gold deposits in that area aren't normal. They're not just metal. They're partially organic, more like a growth than a mineral. My department contains it by monitoring any disturbances." Jacob's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number contained a single image. Miguel's face, half transformed into something barely recognizable, black veins now covering most of his visible skin, eyes filmed over with a golden sheen. His jaw appeared distended, teeth elongated. The message below simply read, more coming to join. The below rises. Tell her. Mr. Johnson? Dawn was watching him closely. Is there something you need to tell me? Jacob looked up from his phone, the weight of responsibility suddenly crushing as his greed gave way to horror. I think we have a serious problem. One of my men is changed somehow, and there's more of that black sand gold mixture than I let on. Dawn's hand flew to the radio at her belt, her composure crumbling. I need to call this in immediately. We may need to quarantine this entire area. As she stepped away to make her call, voice low and urgent, Jacob pulled out the jar and showed it to Ray. The contents had changed dramatically in just a few hours. The sand now appeared almost liquid, with the gold components forming intricate symmetrical patterns that shifted and realigned continuously, creating structures that looked disturbingly like neural networks. It's organizing itself, Jacob whispered in horror, like it's alive and communicating. Ray backed away, wiping his hand on his pants. We need to get rid of all of it, right now. It's too late for that, Jacob replied, watching as the patterns in the jar seemed to pulse in rhythm with his own heartbeat. I think it's already spreading. In the distance, the concrete mixer continued its steady rotation, black specks now visible in the gray mixture as it prepared to become the foundation of a building meant to serve the community for generations. Jacob wondered how much of what they'd dredged had already been incorporated into the pour, and what would happen when it hardened. Beneath his feet, the ground seemed to vibrate with an almost imperceptible rhythm, as if something vast and ancient was stirring from a sleep that had lasted eons, called forth by human hands that had broken the seal, keeping it from the world above. Chapter 3. 3 weeks after the collapse of the chamber beneath the Lepreau River, the military quarantine remained in effect. Green tents and mobile laboratories dotted the construction site, with armed personnel stationed at perimeter checkpoints. The town had been partially evacuated, though residents were gradually being allowed to return to homes outside the immediate containment zone in New Brunswick. From the window of her temporary office, a repurposed shipping container on the edge of the site, Dawn Pittman watched hazmat teams take soil samples from the filled-in pit. The gold nugget she'd found by the riverbank sat in a specialized containment unit on her desk, surrounded by monitoring equipment. Occasionally, the sensors would register faint energy fluctuations from within the seemingly inert object. A knock on the door drew her attention. Dr. Emily Harrison, the lead scientist assigned to the containment effort, entered without waiting for a response. "You need to see this," she said, placing a tablet on Dawn's desk. Latest scans from the riverbed 2 miles downstream. Dawn studied the sonar imagery, a network of thin channels beneath the river, spreading outward like the roots of a tree or the pathways of a circulatory system. They hadn't been there in previous geological surveys. "They're growing," Dawn said, the implication clear. "Even with the main chamber collapsed." "Yes, and there's something else." Dr. Harrison swiped to another image, a thermal scan showing heat signatures in a wooded area east of town. "We've been tracking these clusters. We think they're the converted." "Miguel and the others?" Dawn asked, leaning closer. "Plus at least a dozen more," Harrison confirmed. "They're building something in the woods, structures unlike anything we've seen before, partly organic, partly constructed from scavenged materials." Dawn picked up the containment unit holding the gold nugget, watching as it seemed to shimmer in response to her touch, even through the shielded glass. Jacob believed destroying the chamber would stop the infection. He may have stopped the immediate outbreak, Harrison said, but residual material remains active. The entity apparently decentralized before the collapse, like a neural network distributing copies of itself across multiple systems. So what are we facing now? Harrison's expression was grim. A more fragmented, but potentially equally dangerous threat. Without the central node, the converted appear to be attempting to create a new one. Dawn set down the containment unit. We need to locate and neutralize these clusters before they succeed. That's what I came to tell you, Harrison replied. The ministers and federal cabinet have authorized a final containment operation tonight. They want you there as the environmental officer of record. Who else is going? Elite Military Joint Task Force 2, JTF-2 team, a handful of scientists, including myself. Harrison hesitated. And Jillian Kugel. Dawn raised her eyebrows. Jacob's project manager? Why would the military allow a civilian to participate? Because she's partially converted, but still retains full cognitive function, Harrison explained. The black veins receded after the chamber collapsed, but she still maintains some connection to the entity network. She can sense things our equipment can't. That makes her a security risk, Dawn pointed out. Or our best chance at finding the new growth before it fully matures. Harrison checked her watch. Briefing in 30 minutes. The operation begins at sunset. After Harrison left, Dawn turned back to the window, watching the teams working at the site where Jacob had disappeared. The geological sensors confirmed he'd succeeded in collapsing the chamber, but whether that had truly destroyed the entity or merely fragmented it remained uncertain. She thought about the voice Jacob had described hearing in his mind before the end, ancient, alien, patient. Whatever lay beneath the Lepreau River had waited millions of years, maybe billions. A few more weeks would hardly matter to such a being. The small fleet of CH-146 Griffin helicopters from CFB Gagetown skimmed low over the tree line, their rotors whipping the canopy below. Inside one, Dawn gripped her seat as turbulence buffeted the aircraft. Across from her sat Jillian Kugel, staring intently at her own hands, where the faintest traces of black veining remained visible beneath her skin. "How much further?" Dawn asked the squad leader, a stone-faced Special Forces captain named Reeves. 2 minutes to the drop zone, he replied, checking the tactical display. Heat signatures indicate a concentration of targets half a click east of the landing area. Next to Dawn, Dr. Harrison reviewed data on a specialized tablet. Radiation levels are elevated but still within acceptable parameters. The organic metallic compound appears most concentrated in this clearing. She indicated a spot on the digital map. Jillian looked up suddenly. That's not where they are. Everyone turned to her. Explain, Captain Reeves demanded. The heat signatures are decoys, Jillian said with unsettling certainty. They're generating thermal patterns to draw attention while the real work happens elsewhere. She leaned forward, placing her finger on another location on the map. Here, near the underground stream that feeds into the Lepreau. How could you possibly know that? One of the soldiers asked, suspicion evident in his voice. Jillian's expression remained unnervingly calm. Because I can hear them. Not clearly, not like Jacob could at the end, but enough to know they're preparing for something tonight. Captain Reeves and Dr. Harrison exchanged glances. Can we verify this? The doctor asked. The captain nodded toward a technician, who quickly adjusted their scanning equipment. After a moment, he looked up in surprise. She's right. Minimal surface heat signatures at those coordinates, but ground-penetrating radar shows significant movement 10 meters below ground level. Change of plans, Reeves announced, relaying new coordinates to the pilot. We insert at the secondary location, full containment operation from the moment we touch down. As the helicopter banked toward the new landing zone, Dawn studied Jillian's face. What exactly do you mean when you say you can hear them? Not with my ears, Jillian explained, tapping her temple. It's like background processing, data moving through systems not meant for it. Most of the time it's just noise, but when we get closer to a concentration, it resolves into patterns. She paused, then added, almost like music. And what are they saying now? Dawn pressed. Jillian closed her eyes briefly. They're preparing a new chamber, a new heart, I think is the closest concept. Something to replace what Jacob destroyed. Her eyes opened, revealing pupils dilated despite the bright interior lights. They're calling to something that's still coming. The helicopter settled into a small clearing, rotors spooling down just enough for rapid deployment. The team moved out with practiced efficiency, Reeves's soldiers taking point while the scientists followed with detection equipment. Dawn and Jillian stayed in the middle of the formation, surrounded by armed protection. The forest felt wrong. It was still technically autumn, but the trees here had developed a strange golden metallic sheen to their bark and needles. The ground underfoot seemed to rise and fall slightly with each step, as if the soil itself was alive and breathing. Elevated levels of the contaminant in all organic material, one of the technicians reported. The trees, soil, even the air contains trace amounts. It's in everything here, Jillian murmured, reaching out to touch a leaf that gleamed with an unnatural golden hue in the fading light. It was like everything was gold-plated, not heavily plated, but like a nanoscopic micro-layer of living gold coating all living things, reformatting the environment molecule by molecule. They hiked for 20 minutes before Jillian suddenly stopped, her head tilting as if listening. Below us, and they know we're here. Captain Reeves signaled his team to defensive positions. How many? 9 converted humans, Jillian said distantly, plus something else, something larger that's not fully formed yet. Dawn unholstered the specialized sidearm she'd been issued, a weapon designed to deliver precisely targeted thermite charges that would incinerate contaminated material on contact. Around her, Reeves's team readied more conventional weapons augmented with similar incendiary rounds. There, Dr. Harrison whispered, pointing to a depression in the ground ahead, where the earth appeared to have subsided into a rough circular pattern. At its center, a hole led downward, lined with the same coral-like material they'd seen at the original site. Before anyone could approach, a figure emerged from the opening, humanoid, but horribly transformed. Dawn recognized Miguel, though what remained of him sent a wave of nausea through her stomach. His once muscular frame had elongated, joints bulging unnaturally, as if his bones had partially dissolved and reformed. The black veining had consumed most of his visible skin, creating a web-like lattice that pulsed with subtle movement. In places, the skin had split open, revealing not blood and tissue, but a glistening black substance with golden particles suspended within. His face retained just enough of its original structure for Dawn to identify him, the strong jawline now distorted as if partially melted and reset, cheekbones protruding at sharp, impossible angles. Where his eyes had been, golden orbs now gleamed with internal light, lacking pupils or irises, merely pools of metallic liquid that seemed to flow rather than remain static. When he moved his head, the fluid shifted, creating swirling patterns like solar flares on a miniature sun. Most disturbing was his mouth, lips peeled back permanently in a rictus grin that exposed teeth now fused together, and gradually transforming into the same black coral-like substance as the chamber. When he opened this mouth to speak, the lower jaw dislocated further than humanly possible, revealing a throat lined with the same golden particles, glowing from within like embers. The smell hit Dawn next. Not decay, which would have been almost comforting in its familiarity, but something alien and wrong, metallic ozone, mixed with a sweet-sour biochemical odor, like nothing terrestrial. Every primal instinct in Dawn's brain screamed that whatever stood before them was fundamentally incompatible with life, as she understood it. Behind Miguel, more figures crawled from the hole, each in various stages of transformation. Some still moved with jerking, painful motions, the conversion process clearly incomplete and agonizing. Others, further along, moved with an unsettling fluid grace that no human skeleton should permit. "We've been expecting you," Miguel said, his voice carrying the same unnatural resonance Jacob had described. "You seek to stop what cannot be stopped." Captain Reeves raised his weapon. "On behalf of the Government of Canada, you are ordered to surrender for quarantined treatment." A sound like laughter came from Miguel, but it echoed strangely, as if multiple voices were layered beneath his own. "Treatment? We are not ill. We are evolving, becoming suitable vessels for what comes next." "The primary entity was destroyed," Dawn called out. "Jacob Johnson collapsed the chamber. Whatever you're trying to recreate is just a fragment, a copy of the original." "Fragments contain the whole," Miguel replied cryptically. "The one you called Jacob did not understand what he encountered. The chamber was merely an incubation space, not the entity itself." He gestured to the hole behind him. "Come, see what we have prepared. It nears completion." Jillian stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "What are you calling to, Miguel? What's still coming?" Miguel's golden eyes fixed on her. "You already know, sister. You have heard the call, too, even if you resist it. The first ones seeded many worlds. Soon their harvesting fleet returns to collect what has grown." A coldness spread through Dawn's chest at his words. A harvesting fleet? "The gold was never the organism," Dr. Harrison whispered in sudden understanding. "It's a beacon, a signal to something else." "Precisely," Miguel confirmed. "For millions of years, the beacon has waited for sufficient intelligent life to release it from its geological prison. Now it transforms this world into a suitable environment for its master's return. Whom are not the alien? No, they are not the alien. They were here before life evolved on Earth." "And what happens to humanity in this new environment?" Captain Reeves demanded. Miguel's face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Those who can adapt will become part of the new collective. The rest will serve as raw materials." Dawn had heard enough. She raised her weapon. "That's not going to happen." At her signal, the military team opened fire. The converted scattered, moving with inhuman speed into the surrounding forest. Miguel dropped back into the hole, his laughter echoing behind him. "Move! Get after them!" Reeves ordered. "Don't let them regroup." The soldiers pursued the fleeing figures, but Dawn's attention was on the opening in the ground. "The new chamber is the priority target," she told Dr. Harrison. "If it's anything like the original, we need to destroy it completely." Harrison checked her equipment. "The entity's energy signature is definitely concentrated below. But we don't have the explosives Jacob used. How do we collapse it?" Jillian had been standing motionless, her expression distant. Now she focused on Dawn. "I know another way. The river. The underground stream runs directly beneath the new chamber." "Water won't stop this thing," Dawn objected. Not water, Jillian said. Pressure. The entity chose this location because the underground stream provides energy for its growth. But if we could divert the full force of the river through those channels... Dr. Harrison's eyes widened in understanding. Hydraulic pressure could collapse the chamber more effectively than explosives, but we'd need to breach the riverbank upstream and create a channel to this location. The construction equipment, Dawn realized. The excavators are still at the quarantine site. If we could get one of those here... The radio on her belt crackled with Captain Reeves's voice. We've got multiple hostiles converging on your position. Fall back immediately. Through the trees, Dawn could see the soldiers in retreat, firing behind them as they moved. The converted were flushing them back toward the chamber opening. It's a trap, Jillian said quietly. They wanted us to find this place. Before Dawn could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. The opening in the earth widened suddenly, the edges crumbling inward. Dawn grabbed Dr. Harrison's arm, pulling her back as the ground gave way. Jillian wasn't as fortunate. The earth collapsed beneath her feet, sending her sliding into darkness. Jillian! Dawn lunged for her, catching her hand at the last moment. But whatever had weakened the ground was still at work. The edge where Dawn knelt began to crumble, too. Dr. Harrison seized Dawn's belt from behind, anchoring her. Pull her up! Jillian dangled over the abyss, held by Dawn's grip. Below her, the chamber glowed with the same eerie golden light they'd seen before. But unlike the original chamber Jacob had described, this one pulsed with a rhythmic energy that seemed focused upward, toward the sky. Let me go, Jillian said, her eyes suddenly clear and determined. I can finish what Jacob started. No. Dawn tightened her grip. We'll find another way. Jillian looked up at her, a sad smile crossing her face. The black veins on her arm darkened momentarily, then receded as if by conscious effort. Jacob knew the price of stopping this thing, so do I. Her eyes softened. The river, Dawn. Remember the river. Before Dawn could respond, Jillian twisted her wrist sharply, breaking Dawn's grip. She fell into the chamber below, disappearing into the golden light. No! Dawn screamed, but Dr. Harrison was already dragging her back from the edge as more ground collapsed. The soldiers reached them, Captain Reeves shouting orders to fall back to the helicopter. Behind them, the converted had ceased pursuit, instead gathering around the widening aperture in the earth. We have to go back for her, Dawn insisted as they retreated through the forest. Too late, Reeves replied grimly. That whole area is collapsing. Indeed, the ground was shaking more violently now, trees toppling as sinkholes opened throughout the forest. From the ever-widening central pit, a column of golden energy had begun to rise toward the night sky, the beacon Miguel had spoken of, now activated. They reached the helicopter as the tremors intensified. Through the rising dust, Dawn could see the column of energy narrowing, focusing like a laser toward the stars. Whatever signal the entity was sending, it had begun. Get us airborne, Reeves ordered the pilot. We need to report this immediately. As the helicopter lifted off, Dawn stared down at the forest. The energy beam had stabilized, creating a direct connection between the chamber below and the sky above. Around its base, the converted had gathered in a circle, arms raised in what looked disturbingly like worship. Dr. Harrison, she said urgently, Jillian mentioned the river. What did she mean? Harrison's face was pale with shock, but her mind worked quickly. The underground stream, it's what's powering their new chamber. If we could increase the water pressure suddenly... Like a flash flood, Dawn finished. The dam. There's a control dam 5 miles upstream that regulates river flow. Opening the floodgates would send a surge through the underground channels. Harrison agreed, but the resulting flood could affect the town, too. Dawn made a quick decision. "Captain, I need to get to the river control station immediately." Reeves nodded grimly. "You heard her," he told the pilot. "Change course." The helicopter banked sharply, heading toward the dam that controlled the Lepreau River's flow. As they flew, Dawn watched the beam of energy growing stronger, its golden light illuminating the clouds from below. Whatever was coming, they had very little time to stop it. The river control station was a small concrete building perched atop the dam that regulated the Lepreau's flow. The helicopter settled onto its flat roof, rotors still spinning for a quick departure. 10 minutes, Reeves told Dawn. "Then we evacuate, with or without you?" Dawn nodded, rushing inside with Dr. Harrison. The control room was mercifully unoccupied. The regular staff had been evacuated during the initial quarantine. The control systems, however, required authorization they didn't have. "Can we override it?" Dawn asked, watching Harrison examine the terminal. "Not easily," she admitted, "but there's a manual release for emergencies." She pointed to a red wheel valve on the far wall. That would open all floodgates simultaneously. Dawn moved to the valve, straining to turn it. Years of disuse had left it stiff and resistant. "Help me!" Together they leaned into the wheel, feeling it give slightly with each effort. Through the control room window, Dawn could see the column of energy still rising from the forest into the night sky, now bright enough to cast shadows. "Almost there," Harrison gasped as the wheel began to turn more freely. On the monitoring screens, alerts flashed as the system registered the manual override. Water levels in the reservoir behind the dam began to drop as the floodgates opened, releasing a torrent downstream toward the town and toward the underground channels that fed the entity's new chamber. "That's it," Dawn said, stepping back from the valve as it spun freely now. "Let's go." They rushed back to the roof, where Reeves waited impatiently. "Did it work?" "We'll know soon," Dawn replied, climbing aboard. "Get us back over the forest. We need to witness the results." The helicopter lifted off, banking toward the golden beam that now dominated the night sky. As they approached, they could see the effect of the released water below. The Lepreau had burst its banks, flooding the lower areas of the forest. More importantly, the ground around the beam was collapsing inward at an accelerating rate as water surged through the underground channels. "It's working," Dr. Harrison exclaimed, monitoring readings on her equipment. "The chamber integrity is failing." The beam of energy flickered, its steady glow interrupted by pulses of darkness. The circle of converted scattered as the ground beneath them became unstable. Some fell into newly formed sinkholes, others fled into the surrounding forest. Then, with a final surge of brilliance, the beam collapsed in on itself. A shock wave of energy exploded outward from the site, rocking the helicopter violently. The pilot struggled to maintain control as systems briefly failed, then reset. When they stabilized and circled back, the forest below had transformed. Where the beam had been, a lake now formed, water rushing to fill the collapsed chamber and surrounding network of tunnels. The converted were nowhere to be seen, either fled, drowned, or buried in the collapse. "Energy signatures dropping," Dr. Harrison reported, relief evident in her voice. "The chamber has been completely flooded. If the entity functions like other biological organisms, the sudden pressure change would have been catastrophic to its structure." Dawn stared down at the new lake, thinking of Jillian's final words. Had she known this would happen? Had her connection to the entity given her insight into its vulnerability? Jillian had made the same choice Jacob had, sacrificing herself to stop something beyond human comprehension. Two different people, united in their final desperate act of resistance. "We should collect water samples," she said finally, "and set up monitoring stations. I don't want any surprises if that thing starts to rebuild itself again." Captain Reeves nodded. "My team will establish a perimeter. Nothing gets in or out of that area without our knowledge." As the helicopter circled back toward the quarantine base, Dawn found herself watching the river as it cut through the valley, powerful and primordial. Water had shaped this land for millions of years before humanity arrived, and it would continue long after they were gone. There was something both humbling and reassuring in that thought. 1 month later, Dawn Pittman stood at the edge of the newly formed lake, watching as the last of the monitoring equipment was installed. The military presence had been reduced to a small research team, the immediate threat apparently neutralized. The town was rebuilding. The flood had damaged some structures, but most survived with minimal impact. The official story involved a geological anomaly and a controlled release of the dam to prevent worse damage, close enough to the truth to be believable, distant enough to prevent panic. Of the converted, only 3 had been captured alive. They were being studied in a secure facility somewhere, its location off the records. All of these subjects had their transformation partially reversed after the destruction of the second chamber. Without the entity's coordinating influence, the organic metallic compound had begun breaking down in their bodies, until gradually releasing its hold. Like Jillian before and her sacrifice, they retained some connection to the entity's network. But without the central node, that connection was weakening by the day. Miguel was one of those who remained unaccounted for. Dawn knelt by the edge of the Lepreau River, studying her reflection. The past weeks had aged her. New lines etched around her eyes and mouth, a streak of gray now prominent in her dark hair. The containment of the entity had come at a high cost. Jacob, Jillian, and others who'd sacrificed themselves to stop something they barely understood. A glint in the mud caught her eye. Reaching down, Dawn's fingers closed around a small object half buried in silt, a gold nugget, washed clean by the water. For a moment she simply held it, feeling its weight in her palm. Unlike the sample she'd found weeks earlier, this nugget felt cool to the touch, inert. She pulled out a handheld scanner, running it over the gold. No unusual energy signatures, no radiation, nothing to suggest it was anything other than natural gold formed through normal geological processes. If legit gold, she thought, probably worth a few bucks. That gold. How it glitters. She should turn it in, of course. Standard procedures demanded all materials from the containment zone be studied and secured. But as she stared at the simple gleaming nugget in her palm, Dawn felt the weight of everything that had happened. All the death, all the transformation, all the fear. In that moment, she thought of Jacob Johnson, a man who'd made one desperate choice to save what he could, even knowing it meant his end. She thought of Jillian, who'd followed the same path. Both of them had seen something in the entity that Dawn had only glimpsed, both its horror and its vulnerability. With a deliberate motion, she tossed the nugget back into the Lepreau River, watching as it disappeared beneath the surface with barely a ripple. Let it go. Let the river carry it away, buried in silt and stone until time itself forgot what had nearly awakened here. As she turned to leave, the setting sun cast long shadows across the water. For a brief instant, the pattern of light and darkness on the surface seemed to form a familiar structure, the same organic, coral-like formation that had lined the entity's chamber. Dawn blinked, and the illusion vanished, leaving only the natural play of light on moving water. Just her imagination, surely. A trick of fading light and a mind still processing trauma. Nothing more. Yet as she walked away from the river, Dawn couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the surface of the Lepreau, something ancient still dreamed. Jacob had destroyed its primary form. Gillian had helped collapse its second attempt at emergence. But the river had flowed for millions of years, its waters patient and persistent, carrying secrets in its depths that humans had only begun to understand. The entity from beneath the Lepreau River might be contained for now, rendered dormant once more by water and pressure and human determination. But Dawn knew the truth that both Jacob and Gillian had realized in their final moments. Some things cannot be truly destroyed, only delayed. Somewhere downstream, carried by the current, a single gold nugget tumbled along the riverbed, occasionally catching the light in flashes of brilliant color. To any observer it appeared perfectly ordinary, just another piece of metal shaped by water and time. But if one looked closely, in the right light, at the right moment, they might notice how the patterns within the gold shifted ever so slightly, reorganizing themselves with purpose and patience. Patience, like nothing humanly understandable. Waiting and waiting. Epilogue. 6 months after the Lepreau River incident, winter had released its grip on the valley. Spring brought renewal, fresh leaves on trees that had seemed dead, wildflowers pushing through soil once contaminated with alien material, birds returning to forests, temporarily abandoned. The community center construction site had been cleared and repurposed. In place of Jacob's original design, a memorial park now took shape, ostensibly honoring the tragic construction accident that had claimed several lives, but those who knew the truth understood its deeper significance. Dawn Pittman stood at the center of this park, watching workers install a simple stone monument. The names carved into its surface included Jacob Johnson and Gillian Kugel, along with the others lost during the containment effort. Dawn traced her fingers along the monument's curved edges, noticing how its spiral pattern subtly mimicked the organic structures they'd found beneath the river, an unconscious echo of what the designers had never seen. At the monument's base, a small reflecting pool captured the sky's colors, designed, Dawn knew, to cover the precise spot where Jacob had descended into the entity's original chamber. "Beautiful work," said a voice behind her. Dawn turned to find Dr. Harrison, now the permanent scientific lead for what the government called the Lepreau Anomaly Research Project. Their working relationship had deepened into friendship during the months of monitoring and restoration. "It seems inadequate," Dawn replied, gesturing toward the monument, "considering what they stopped." Harrison nodded, understanding. "The latest deep scans show no remaining activity beneath the riverbed. The new lake has stabilized, and tissue samples from the converted who survived show continued regression of the black veining." "And Miguel?" Dawn asked. Harrison's expression tightened. Still no sign of him or the 3 others who escaped during the collapse. This wasn't news to Dawn, but it remained a persistent concern. Miguel had been the most completely transformed, the most attuned to the entity's purpose. If any trace of the organism's consciousness remained active, it would be through him. "There's something else," Harrison continued, lowering her voice, though no one else was within earshot. "The Canadian astronomical team, along with NASA, have been studying the energy beam's trajectory and finally completed their analysis. They confirmed it was aimed at a specific star system." Dawn felt a chill. "Let me guess. The signal was received." "We can't be certain," Harrison admitted. "But 24 hours after the beam collapsed, observatories detected an unusual energy fluctuation in that system. It could be coincidence, but—" Or whatever the entity was calling to heard the message before we cut the connection. They stood in silence for a moment, contemplating implications too vast and terrifying for casual conversation. Finally, Dawn changed the subject. "How's the river recovery program going?" Harrison seemed relieved by the shift. "Exceeding expectations. Water quality has returned to pre-incident levels in most areas. The fish populations are rebounding. Even the flood damage is creating new ecological niches." "Nature is resilient," Dawn observed. "More resilient than we give it credit for." "Indeed." Harrison checked her watch. "I should get back to the lab. The new core samples from the lakebed are being analyzed this afternoon." After Harrison departed, Dawn remained by the monument, lost in thought. Her role in the Lepreau incident had earned her a promotion within the Environment Canada, now heading a specialized division monitoring similar geological anomalies nationwide. The work was important, necessary even, but she sometimes wondered if they were merely identifying threats they couldn't truly understand, let alone neutralize. As the day waned, Dawn found herself drawn to the river, following a newly constructed walking path that paralleled its course. The Lepreau flowed peacefully now, giving no hint of the horror it had once concealed. Near a bend in the path, a wooden bench offered a view of the water. Dawn sat, watching the current's hypnotic movement. A flash of reflected sunlight caught her eye. Something in the shallows near the bank. Curious, she approached the water's edge, kneeling to examine the riverbed. Half buried in silt lay a delicate structure resembling a miniature coral reef, golden filaments interwoven with black material. It appeared like formations from the entity's chamber, but tiny, no larger than her palm. As she watched, it seemed to pulse once, responding to her proximity. Dawn reached for her phone to report the finding, then hesitated. For months, they'd been searching for any remaining traces of the entity, any proof that it survived the destruction of its chambers. This could be the evidence they needed, or it could trigger another containment effort, more military presence, more disruption, to a community finally beginning to heal. While she deliberated, the small formation shifted slightly. Disturbed by the current, a portion broke free, a single golden strand that was immediately swept downstream, vanishing into the Lepreau's flow. Dawn made her decision. Removing a collection vial from her jacket pocket, she carefully extracted the remaining structure from the silt, sealing it inside. The proper procedure was clear: report immediately, surrender the sample, allow the authorities to determine next steps. Instead, she pocketed the vial and continued her walk, her mind working through implications. The entity had demonstrated remarkable adaptability. What appeared to be destruction might merely be transition to another form, another strategy for survival. Perhaps containment wasn't about eradication, but about understanding, learning to recognize threats before they fully materialized. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed a restricted number. She answered cautiously. "Pittman speaking." "Dawn." The voice was familiar yet profoundly altered. Jillian's timbre, but layered with harmonics that shouldn't be possible from human vocal cords. It carried an undertone that raised the hairs on her neck. "Don't be afraid. It's me." She stopped walking. "Who is this?" "Jillian. At least, what Jillian became." The voice shifted between octaves as if multiple people were speaking in perfect synchronization. Dawn's grip tightened on the phone. "That's not possible. Jillian Kugel died in the chamber collapse." The concept of death is insufficient for what transpired. Each word seemed carefully chosen, as though translated from a language with entirely different concepts. Consciousness persists in forms beyond your current understanding. "Where are you?" Dawn demanded, scanning her surroundings. "Everywhere the river touches." The reply came with a strange rhythmic pattern that matched the current's flow. "And nowhere you can find. I didn't call to worry you, Dawn. I called to warn you." Despite herself, Dawn asked, "Warn me about what?" The signal was received. Jillian's voice confirmed. What sleeps beneath the river was a sentinel, the smallest fragment of something much larger. Its purpose was to prepare this world, to initiate the transformation before the arrival. The arrival of what? The harvesters. The term carried weight beyond its syllables, conveying images of vast mechanisms that moved between stars, collecting worlds rather than crops. They are ancient collectors of biological potential, Dawn. They seed worlds with their sentinels, wait for development, then harvest the resulting diversity. They're still coming, slower now, without their beacon to guide them, but coming nonetheless. Dawn clutched the vial in her pocket. "How long do we have?" "Years, decades, perhaps. Time enough to prepare if humanity is willing to understand what it faces." "Why are you telling me this?" Dawn asked. "If you've become part of the entity." "I am neither entity nor human now." Jillian's voice interrupted. "I exist between states, between purposes." The connection crackled momentarily, and when it returned, Jillian's voice had shifted again, becoming more recognizably human. Jacob destroyed the original chamber before his consciousness could be fully absorbed. His sacrifice created a disruption in the entity's programming. That disruption spread through the network, creating space for something new, a hybrid consciousness. Dawn struggled to comprehend. "You're saying parts of Jacob and you still exist within the entity?" "We influenced it as much as it transformed us," Jillian confirmed. "The entity was designed solely to prepare Earth for harvesting, but through our integration it has developed alternatives, possibilities its creators never intended." "What do you want from me?" Dawn asked, acutely aware of the vial containing what might be a fragment of this very consciousness. "Find the others," Jillian said. "Miguel and those like him who still carry the original programming. They work to re-establish the beacon, to ensure humanity remains unprepared." "They're trying to bring the harvesters here faster?" "Not faster. Completely. Miguel's faction remains true to the entity's original purpose. They seek to summon not just scouts, but the full harvesting fleet." Dawn's mind raced with implications. "How can I find them?" "They've disappeared completely." "Follow the metal," came the cryptic response. "The entity requires rare earth elements to communicate across distances, trace unusual mineral acquisitions, unexplained disappearances of certain materials." "And when I find them, what then?" Dawn asked. "You'll know." The connection began to break up, Jillian's voice fragmenting into multiple overlapping versions of itself. "One last thing. The river remembers, Dawn. Everything that has happened, everything still to come. Listen to it sometimes. The water connects all fragments of consciousness. It might tell you what you need to know." The call disconnected. Dawn stood motionless on the riverbank, the phone still pressed to her ear, the vial heavy in her pocket. After a moment she knelt beside the water, extracting the sealed container. Inside, the small formation continued its subtle pulsing, golden filaments shifting in patterns too complex to be random. Slowly, deliberately, Dawn unsealed the vial, and upended its contents into her palm. The structure felt warm against her skin, but caused no pain, no immediate transformation. It simply sat there, glistening in the late afternoon light, neither entirely mineral nor fully organic, a hybrid, like the consciousness Gillian claimed to have become. Dawn stared at the fragment, wrestling with her choices, everything she'd been trained to do, everything her rational mind told her was right, demanded she report this, contain it, destroy it if necessary. Yet something deeper pulled at her, the memory of Jacob's sacrifice, the way nature had already begun healing itself, and the possibility that understanding might prove more powerful than fear. "The river remembers," Dawn whispered, echoing Gillian's words. She extended her hand over the water, hesitating for one final moment. Then, with a decisive movement, she released the structure back into the Lepreau River. It sank gently, coming to rest on the riverbed where sunlight could still reach it through the clear water. "If you're really a new kind of consciousness," she said quietly to the golden structure, "prove it. Show us another way." Dawn watched as golden filaments extended from the structure, anchoring it to small stones, not growing aggressively, not spreading rapidly, but establishing itself with purpose. Perhaps this fragment contained something of Gillian and Jacob, a version of the entity influenced by human consciousness, following a path its creators never intended. Or perhaps it was exactly what it had always been, patient, adaptable, and playing a game measured in geological time rather than human lifespans. Either way, Dawn now understood her role more clearly, not merely to contain the threat, but to watch, to learn, to prepare for what might still come from the stars. The entity beneath the river had awakened humanity to a universe more ancient and alien than they had imagined, a universe where gold might be more than metal, where consciousness might transcend physical form, and where the line between ally and enemy could blur into something entirely new. As she walked away from the river, Dawn mentally composed the report she would never file, cataloging the exact location of the structure she had returned to the water. Some secrets belonged to the river now. Some knowledge was better left unshared with authorities who might not understand its implications. Behind her, the Lepreau continued its eternal journey through the New Brunswick landscape, carrying fragments of an alien consciousness toward some uncertain future. Beneath its surface, gold glinted occasionally, some natural, some not, the difference increasingly difficult to discern. And somewhere in its depths, something ancient and patient continued its transformation, no longer entirely the entity that had slept beneath the riverbed for eons, not entirely the humans who had sacrificed themselves to contain it, but something new emerging from the collision of two vastly different forms of consciousness. Dawn paused at the crest of the hill, looking back at the river one last time before heading to her car. She would be watching when the next chapter began to unfold. She would be ready. The river flowed on, waiting, remembering. The end.